Immurement was a form of execution which would follow someone being sentenced to death for a crime. It was also used for human sacrifice throughout the centuries, and also as a form of torture. The method was where people were enclosed in a very tight and small confinement, such as a room, which would then be sealed up, or even a small box such as a coffin which was sealed. This would then lead to someone being left to die from starvation or dehydration, and it was different from being buried alive, as a victim with this would die from suffocation. It was a very tough form of a death, as someone would literally have to wait for their own death and for their ordeal to be over. But what is the story behind it? Remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. One of the earliest accounts of the method comes from the Roman Empire, where it was used as a punishment for a group of women, known as the Vestal virgins, who took strict vows of celibacy. They devoted themselves to tending a fire honouring the goddess Vesta, and if one of the women broke their vow of celibacy, they would be killed and buried inside of the city. This happened, and an account of the offending women's immurement alive states, when condemned by the College of Pontifices, she was stripped of her vitae and other badges of office, was scourged, attired like a corpse, placed in a closed litter, borne through the forum attended by her weeping kindred, with all the ceremonies of a real funeral, to a rising ground, called Campus Sceleratus. This was located just within the city walls and gate. A small vault underground had been previously prepared, containing a couch, a lamp, and a table with little food. The Pontifex Maximus, having lifted up his hands to heaven and uttered a prayer, opened the litter, led forth the culprit, and placed her on the steps of the ladder, which gave her access to the subterranean cell. He delivered her over to the common executioner and his assistants, who led her down, drew up the ladder, and having filled the pit up with earth until the surface was level with the surrounding ground, left her to perish, deprived of all tributes of respect usually paid to the spirits of the departed. There were around 10 accounts of Vestal virgins being immured for breaking their vows. Immurement was also used during the Middle Ages, and was used by the Roman Catholic Church, who punished monks and nuns who broke their vows or challenged the teachings of the Church. These were meant to not die within days, but were instead intended to live long lives of isolation away from everyone, refusing to have contact with the outside world. They would only have a small amount of food dropped through small passages on a daily basis. This led to many different skeletal remains of people who were immured being found in the following centuries in countries such as England, Italy, Germany and France. People were simply forced into small chambers and were then sealed in. After these entrances were bricked up and so on. For example, in the 1800s, a bridge in Bremen in Germany was demolished and found with the immured remains of a child inside of a fountain. Also in a church in Lincolnshire in England, the remains of an immured individual was found. Elizabeth Bathory, the Hungarian countess, often compared with Vlad the Impaler, was immured herself in a number of rooms in 1610. She had been sentenced to this for the death of a number of girls, and some estimates placed her number of victims in the hundreds. She died 4 years later after her immurement was sealed, dying of causes other than starvation, as her rooms were often well supplied with food. There are many different accounts of immurement. One states, in the case of Jean, widow of B. de la Tour, a nun of L'Espanasse, in 1246, who had committed acts of heresy, the sentence was confinement in a separate cell in her own convent, where no one was to enter or see her, her food being pushed in through an opening left for the purpose. Another account states, at Lodi in 1662, Sister Antonia Margarita Limera stood trial for having introduced a man into her cell and entertained him for a few days. She was sentenced to be walled in, alive on a diet of bread and water. It had been used in Asia as early as 2500 BC, where a number of burials allude to immurement. However, in Persia, it was a tradition that it's believed was even used very recently. An account from Persia states, another sad sight to be seen in the desert sometimes are brick pillars in which some unfortunate victim is walled up alive. The victim is put into a pillar, which is half built in readiness. Then if the executioner is merciful, he will cement quickly up to his face, and death comes speedily. but sometimes a small amount of air is allowed to permeate through the bricks, and in this case the torture is cruel and the agony prolonged. Men bricked up in this way have been heard groaning and calling for water at the end of 3 days. It was used in other countries also, was also used in Mongolia as recent as the early 1900s, and in coffin form. One account says, the prisons and dungeons of the far eastern country contain a number of refined Chinese, shut up for a life in heavy iron-bound coffins, which do not permit them to sit upright or lie down. These prisoners see daylight for only a few minutes daily, when the food is thrown into their coffins through a small hole. Whether it was inside of a coffin or within a walled cell within castles or priories and buildings, immurement would have been incredibly tragic. It would have been very sad and brutal, with the victims simply waiting for their own death, and it was similar to an oubliette, where someone was simply forgotten and left to die. What is also sad is that examples of immurement can be found today inside some of the walls in some structures, which means many of these stories have yet to be told. It was used all over the world, and immurement was incredibly disturbing. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.